retrograde. We're very brave trying this.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay, because you know what?
Yeah.
I was on the verge of canceling a couple of times just because, sometimes I guess I have Neptune opposition my Mercury, and every once in a while my speech and my thoughts do not connect. And and every time I almost kind of panic sometimes when I've got an interview and I feel that that's on the verge of being, you know what I mean?
Well, listen, you and me can float off into K-Rose space because I have a mutable cross in my chart, and Mercury and Saturn are all over that shit. So, I mean, I'm Neptunized for like the rest of my life, because it's just, I have mutable cross, mutable signs, and I just have to exist between the worlds. It's just the way it is.
Well, I've seen many of your interviews, and you're very smooth and very eloquent, so I don't think it ever shows up in your...
Yeah, okay. So do you, just so I know, do you primarily want to talk about regression work, etc.?
Well, basically, I have kind of a similar set of questions that I ask everybody. So I've been talking to scientists, the whole gamut of human perspective. And,
all right.
And what I'm doing is kind of contrasting all these perspectives with similar questions. And of course, the answers that I get will send me off into a direction.
Right.
But I always go in the direction of consciousness. That's always where I'm going.
Good.
So wherever people point to in their own perspective what consciousness is where I go with them. So,
okay.
So I always start with a question that deals with the world. I don't know if you've seen any of my interviews, but...
I did. I watched a few of them. Well, I watched the one with Levy because I love his... I don't know. I never say it right. Is it Whitico or Wittico or...
Yeah.
Wittico. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. In evolutionary astrology, we work with the Lucifer principle, and we describe it exactly as he describes Wittico. So when I saw his book years ago, I guess when it came out, I went, wow, we're talking the same thing.
Well, you've mentioned also in other interviews that you have a shamanistic experience.
Yeah.
I know that with, I don't know if you've read Carlos Castaneda.
Yes, a long time ago, like high school time ago.
Well, a lot of people in that tradition, and I've interviewed another fellow that's carried on that tradition, Michael Krellman. They speak of inorganic beings that basically are Wetiko. From a seer's point of view, they are inorganic beings that influence us from the world of our energy bodies.
Okay.
So it's interesting to see all these different perspectives. That's another thing too, which I kind of I explore with everybody is everybody's perspectives of usually similar things.
Right. Right.
And
well, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Okay.
So the first question I ask.
Yes.
To enter into our conversation is, how would you describe the state of the world today?
In flux. To have an astrological background is to be able to look at patterns and cycles. So, if we take astrology as a patterning of human consciousness or how we interact with the cosmos, then we can say there are some serious patterns going on or repeating cycles going on right now. I made a correlation a while ago. I'd say, gosh, it was back in around 2000. Around 2000, 2003, I had the feeling that there were different returning cycles of time coming around, some longer cycles, some shorter cycles. One was the return of a replay of the Crusades. The second was the replay of the fall of the Roman Empire. And the third was the replay of the populist movement. And what spurred my thinking on that was that I lived in the Hudson Valley up in New York, where all of those mansions are, the Roosevelt Mansion and Vanderbilt and all of that. And I didn't know a lot about the populist movement. And I had this kind of intuition about, there's a returning cycle of that. Now, remember, this is back around 2003, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And and then shortly thereafter, I came across I believe it was Bill Moyer's book called In America or On America, where he elaborates on the viability of the possible populist party that arose in backlash to the Roaring Twenties. And I said, wow, maybe I am really tuned into something. So with those three repeating cycles, I really feel they're converging right at this moment. From an astrological perspective, the USA as a colonial, right? The white history of the USA, certainly it has a longer history, but the civilization, which term I use loosely, that we built, we are now going into what's called our Pluto return, which will happen every 240 some odd years. So the US has never experienced that. And in an esoteric sense, the Pluto return is the initiation of the soul. People never experience it. Entities and countries, organizations can experience it. But it really is the initiation of the soul, right? And so we could say to a certain degree it's the ensoulment of our nation. But what happens when we talk about soul making in just a single lifetime, and in just one person's lifetime? Soul making involves the necessary descent into shadow, because soul making is deconditioning along with individuation, right? So things fall apart and things come back together in a different way. All of those things are part of deconstructing, deconditioning, and individuating both astrological principles. And all of those energies are in play right now. So I'm slightly hopeful that, out of the ashes, speaking Plutonian language, right? Crash, burn, die, and then get born again, speaking Plutonian language, that, and with Pluto in Capricorn, what we really see is a rise of the old structures, right? Because Capricorn is man-made law. It's all of these things that we build, that we hold sacred, and they're father institutes. They're governments and corporations, and all of those things are ruled by Capricorn, as well as authoritarian law is ruled by Capricorn. It's the strict father in one level of the spectrum of meaning of that archetype. And with Pluto there's a necessary, or let's say there's a spiritual intention or a soul intention to transform those structures. Are we going to do it? I don't know. I mean, the structures we have are certainly being tested. If they will, if the power elites get more entrenched, which is also what we're seeing with Pluto and Capricorn, right? It's like the dinosaurs dying out. They're like in their last hurrah, So that, to me, again, giving it an astrological backdrop, I would say that that's a general picture of what I see as the state of the world right now.
Well, is conflict then necessary for the evolution of awareness?
Yeah. I'm sorry, the question was?
So is conflict necessary then for the evolution of awareness?
It's the way that humans do it. And it's not the only way that evolution happens. I mean, we see if we take natural law and how many years we've been studying the human psyche and look at how the human psyche correlates with natural law, there's uniform evolution that happens over long, slow periods of time. There's cataclysmic evolution that happens. And human consciousness tends to, certainly collective consciousness, this is a longer discussion, right? What is the level of evolution of any collective consciousness? I've always said that I believe, or I've observed, put any group of people together and it will literally flow to the lowest common denominator, not the highest, right? Not quite sure what laws of physics that might apply to that. It doesn't really matter if there are any, but it's simply my personal observation. Given that, when I'm sorry. I have too many thoughts coming in at
Well,
once.
let me steer it in a certain way here.
Yes.
Yeah, it's one of those days.
Yeah. Mercury
Well,
retrograde.
it seems like we have a few. Well, let's break down the human being. It seems to me that we have a few lineages that we have to deal with. I mean, different forces at play working on us. We have our genetic lineage, our history. We have our archetypical one. Maybe our the one that you would say that is our karmic history, because that would be different than our physical lineage, I would imagine. How do those all play out with each other?
Okay, think of the Russian dolls. Russia, interesting. Think of the nesting dolls, right? This is my picture of the different, what I call bands of karmic or collective conditioning that we all participate in. If we think about the evolution of, I have to back up. And let me give you a picture.
Sure.
Spirit descends into soul, soul descends into ego, right? So let's take, and this can correlate to the three worlds of shamanism to a certain degree, right? So if we talk about spirit as pure, unadulterated, unconditioned consciousness that's simply divine impulse, that steps itself down when we talk about an incarnational history. That steps itself down into what we call soul, right? Which is much closer to Earth experience as it records all of Earth experience. But spirit coming into soul alone creates or goes through bands of conditioning. And that conditioning it goes from increasingly collective to increasingly personal, right? I think in Vedanta they say there's like 14 different kinds of karma. It's a more complex picture than, New Age or Western concepts of karma are. So spirit stepping into soul is subject to certain conditions, like what is the whole collective, what does it mean to be a human on Earth, or what does it mean to have consciousness, period, is a band of karma, right? That then gets imprinted on the soul. So these increasingly collective bands become more personal, and then soul, again, steps itself, we would say, down, and I mean that by density, right? Vibration steps itself into ego. Ego, to me, a quick definition of ego is the combination of our physical etheric body, energetic body, so I'm talking subtle bodies from Vedantic philosophy, etheric body, emotional body, mental body. That's the content of our ego, right? And so we step through collective bands of what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be on Earth? What does it mean to be, or what are the conditions of a certain geography that you live in or a culture that you're born in? Then that steps into your ancestry. What is your familial line? What is that resonance? That then steps into the culmination of what have all of your thoughts ever been in other lifetimes, right? Or what have you imprinted in your mental body? What have you imprinted in your emotional body? What have you imprinted in your physical body? So to a certain degree, there's all of those bands that are interpenetrated. Does that answer your question?
Right. Right. And I imagine is that what you do with Heal the Past? Is integrate those three bodies to make your way back to?
Absolutely. Well, again, there is a New Age misnomer that karma is about learning lessons, and if we get our lesson, we're over it. And I say that in a sing-song kind of mocking voice for a reason. 20 years of experience is showing me that it's not that simple, right? The mental body is only one of our subtle bodies. And the mental body does interpenetrate with the emotional body, does interpenetrate with the etheric body. But if the imprint is not held on the mental body, for example, if there's an emotional imprint that's held that may have thoughts attached to it, yet the real trauma is held in the emotional body, you're not going to release it by just knowing the circumstances of what happened or just learning the lesson. Each one of those bodies, and this is where shamanism comes in helpful, because again, that model of the three worlds, there's rules for each level of our being, just as there's rules, when I say use rules or conditions, or even you could say language, right? The physical body's language is completely different than the mental body's language. And you can't, no matter how many mantras you do or, positive affirmations, the body does not hear that as much as the body hears things on its own level. So if you've carried an imprint of, let's say, being hanged, right? And it's in your etheric body, maybe connected to an emotional sense of defeat and the thought of, oh, I deserved that, it's all my fault, right? Those are three things connected. So first we have to clear you could do it in any order, but first we have to clear it's all my fault, I deserve that, which is an energy that turns in on itself, which then becomes the emotional energy of defeat, which is all imprinted in the physical wound in the neck, right, which can carry to other lifetimes as, slip discs or whatever. So the point is, all in our work, in deep memory process, all of those bodies are worked with. When I teach students, I tell them it's like you're juggling three balls. You're juggling three subtle bodies throughout the entire session. Because when we talk about samskaras and wounds to the soul, they need to be purified from all of those bodies. And to do it simultaneously is actually the best way to unlock the trauma that's in there.
So then are human beings just locked in memory until they free themselves of what you might call that karmic imprint?
I think we're in conditions. I think if I were to give it a big picture, I would say that the divine, whatever our concept of that is, decided to experience itself through coming into incarnation. And that's the first imperfection. In fact, that's in Vedantic thought when we talk about Brahma, right? That Brahma, there's a manifest and an unmanifest divine. The unmanifest divine we can never know, right? But it's pure potentiality. But once it steps into incarnation, it has imperfection, right? That's the first band of karma. So there's a condition right there. The fact that the divine itself stepped away from itself is something that we are all subject to as manifestations or emanations of that original divine impulse. And then again, back to the picture that I said before, and then there's also, when I would say there's conditions, right? So conditioning and memory can be synonymous. There's one's personal experiences as an individuated unconscious, right? An individuated soul having its experiences, but there's collective conditions as well.
So is that what what you would say then is the purpose of life, is for the experience of the void to experience itself?
I think that that's what's happening. I think the divine is evolving all of the time, hence why we even have the concept of evolution, right? In nature, in human consciousness. So it is imperfect, it is evolving, and the what happens through the flowering of that evolution is, to me, the ecstatic experience, I guess is the word I would say, is the divine having an ecstatic experience of itself. So yes, we are that. We know in our core, right? Again, back to Vedantic philosophy, we are not intrinsically evil, we are intrinsically good. We've simply forgot that, right? It's a completely different picture than the Judeo-Christian model. But we are we are meant to be immersed in this experience, as deeply as possible. Does trauma and all those things happen through that immersion, yes. So then there's the purification of that, or the clearing of that, so that the in say Gnostic philosophy, back to the Judeo-Christian thing, the parable that works exactly on this is the parable of the prodigal son, right? So in that parable, there's two sons, and one stays in the father's house, and one goes off into the world and squanders his father's fortune and gets drunk and sleeps with whores and does all kinds of earthly things, right? And the other son stays home and he's the good boy. And then the prodigal son comes home and the father welcomes him with open arms, and the other son is like, hey, what about me? Right? I've been like, and I forget what the phrase is, but it's something like, returning to the father's house is okay. That's what we're doing, right? My picture of it is like at the beginning of time, the Big Bang, if we say that's the way it happened, right? The divine took individuated sparks of itself and cast them as far away as possible through those dimensions into soul, into ego, into matter. And we're meant to be having this immersive experience over many, many cycles of times, many, many lifetimes, right? But there's dirt that comes with that, right? When you play an earthly experience, you accumulate some stuff. And at some point, this is actually a theosophical term when they call it that at some point in one's incarnational history, when one has gone through the process of involution, which is moving away from the source, there comes a wake-up call. They call it the call of return, right? And once one hears the call of return, they are then on the path of conscious evolution. And that's return to the source, which then gets into how do I decondition, how do I individuate, how do I shed all of this and become a spiritual being, right? And that's a long, slow process, many, many, many lifetimes. So for me, the people that are not concerned about there's more than this are simply souls that are still on the path of involution, right? They're still separating from the divine. That's their job. That's what they're supposed to do, right? People that have heard the call of return or in their current life go, wait a minute, there must be more than this, and start waking up to different things. Those are the souls that are on the path of return.
So can anybody that's be drawn to that path, or is it just that people who are on that path will be drawn to you? In other words, can you actually put somebody on that path?
Not before their time. I mean, I know that's counter to some Eastern philosophies, that say anybody can awaken at any moment. Certainly that's at the core of Buddhism, right? But, my thing is that I think my particular experience philosophy, certain people are drawn to the kind of work that I do because they're impulsed by their soul. They are driven by something deeper inside of them, right? Whatever it is, it's often experienced as a divine discontent, a sense of self-improvement. I need to heal this, because to me, in our age, healing is synonymous with spirituality, right? To me, which means going deeper into one's psyche, right? It's synonymous with spirituality. I believe that the models of spirituality that we had before are changing. When we talk about the return of the feminine, it's a larger discussion, but in brief, the feminine principle is soul. Spirit is masculine, right? We give it so spirit is masculine, and that's always transcendent and above and detached. Soul is icky and immersed, and it's got mud on it, right? That's a feminine principle. It's tied to the emotion and the earth and all of the wounds and joys of incarnation and experience. So those old models that are like, forget about this and only focus on spirit, are incomplete models for our time. When you asked me, even going back to the beginning, state of the world, to me, you got to go down to go up. The deeper you go, and that's certainly something that was initiated not in our lifetimes, but before us with the birth of depth psychology, right? When Jung and Freud were, tapping, and that was exactly at the point of the discovery of the planet Pluto, right? 1930s, where they were both plumbing the depths of the human psyche, and Jung certainly turned it more into a spiritual quest, perhaps, than Freud did. But so to a certain degree, I think there's a need to reach up, but at the same time, there's a need to go down. And that's the bringing together of the masculine and feminine poles, right? To a certain degree, that feminine side where it's icky and it's emotional and it's irrational and it's immersed in earthly experience is being recaptured because it was so severed through the Enlightenment movement prior, the Judeo-Christian, where it's all icky, bad, all of that. So I think, there's a merging of those two models.
Emerging, I guess, a reconciliation. I guess you have to transcend the polarity of healing and sickness and feminine and masculine to some degree.
Well, I think, I don't even know if it's you need to transcend it. There is a state where it doesn't matter.
Right.
But when you're in a human body, there is duality, right? When you're in a human body, yes. Can we experience what it's like to be beyond that? Of course we can. It takes a lot of work, though. Right?
I imagine that it can be reconciled as a duality. I guess that's the symbol of yin and yang, right? It's one, and the duality is there, but it's reconciled.
Well, I'm saying in the natural order, neither is superior or inferior. It's what we have done to it. Right, through our I really say man-made systems, that we have devalued the irrational and devalued the emotional, and devalued the physical experience, right? And as you know, that then becomes a devaluing of the earth and devaluing of natural law and all of that. And that's been a progressive movement, if we put it in historical context, perhaps since the whole, Judeo-Christian, and then further into, the age of reason and enlightenment and all that.
So is everything that man does, humans do, is that just a lower octave of what we're doing at the higher octave?
Well, you mean we're consumers?
Well, consumers...
Want to put it in marketing terms?
Yeah, really.
The macrocosm reflects the microcosm.
Well,
right?
What I mean...
As above, so below. That's Tycho Brahe, right? As above, so below. So to a certain degree, I would say yes to your answer. Do I know what that big... I don't know. We create these human-made structures. Are they reflective of a higher divine reality? What is the big picture? Then you have to get into the question of, is there a divine plan? Or is it just, like I said, the divine experiencing itself? It's kind of like, do you remember that game a long time ago called Sim Earth?
Yeah.
Where you could create your own computer model. Yeah. And there were all these variations that you could put in it, but it basically ran. So I remember once I played it, and I decided to make, and it takes days to do it, because you run the simulation, you create your own world, right? And then, so I made mine mostly water, and I made dolphins, so that I skewed it so that they would become the most evolved sentient beings, and it runs over days, right? So you set certain parameters, but then you kind of let it go. And this is interesting. Do you know the Gnostic creation story of Sophia?
No.
So back to what may be at the core, some of the sacred core of the Judeo-Christian thought or Christian thought, if we go into the Gnostic teachings, in that, it really is an experiment, right? There's this, to a certain degree, the unmanifest divine that has these polarities that are called syzygies, right? And Sophia is a syzygy to this other being called Christos. And Sophia falls out of the pleroma. This is the Gnostic creation story. It's actually like it's like somebody's got to make a science fiction movie out of this. It's really quite fascinating. And Sophia falls out of the pleroma, and then affects the experiment, right? It's a bit like that. Is it the Heidegger principle, right? You can't, observe something, right? Is that?
Right.
Am I right in that? Or Heisenberg, whichever one it is. Um, so to a certain degree, it's like something, the seed of the anthropos, or the seed in the Gnostic creation story, is set adrift and kind of left to develop. Yes, it has, just like when you're born, right? Your parents, you get to a certain point, you leave the house, right? You're on your own. What you do with your life, because then we get into the question of, is there personal will, divine will, right? So is there free will? So within us, we would say there's a certain model, there's a certain programming, there's a certain cosmic something,
order,
the divine creating itself within its own image. I use that word lightly because all of creation is the divine image. But then maybe it's just kind of left to develop, to see, well, what's going to happen. So there's a combination there, right? I don't think it's one or the other.
Well, being an astrologer, you must have a sense that there's obviously a divine order or a divine structure to things.
Yeah. Well, I think all you have to do, I'm looking out my window now at my garden.
Right.
It's pretty obvious there's an intelligence out there. There's some order and structure going on.
So where is the free will in that?
Oh, I have an analogy for that. I have an analogy of a hamster in a cage. So if you're the hamster and you're in a cage, you have free will. You can go to your water bottle, you can run in the wheel, you can make a little bed, you can stuff stuff in your cheeks, right? There's a certain amount of things you can do, yet you have the parameter of the cage. So think of that cage as all of those layers of conditioning that I talked about, right? Now, I would say the divine plan, if there is one, is to maximize free will, to become an aware divine being itself, a complete co-creator in reality, which means your job is to keep expanding your cage, right? So you have more, and all of those layers go back to the Russian dolls, right? Clear up your own karma, work through the ancestral line. What does it mean, as your consciousness gets progressively collective, you're then working in more and more archetypal collective bands of consciousness. A person who works at that level has a lot more free will than somebody who's not aware they're in a cage at all, right? That's the point.
So are we also then evolving the archetypes? Evolving
Yeah,
us?
oh, totally. I see that in my work all of the time. Well, I see it one way that you can definitely see the evidence of it is when a person does some ancestral work, let's say with spirits of past generations that are still holding on to a particular wound or complex. And we work with that descendant, right? Or I work with that descendant, and we help heal that spirit in the afterlife, help it finish its unfinished business. And then without anybody ever having told the rest of the family what they were doing, because usually, the people that come to this work are like the weirdos in the family, right? Like nobody would understand, I just went to this workshop to work with my ancestral spirits. Like they wouldn't even tell their family that, right? And then instantly, after this piece of work is done, the whole family field shifts. And even the people that were unaware or unconcerned, like, they're just, living there, doing their 9-to-5 job, and they don't think about anything greater than that, perhaps, their lives change. Like, all of a sudden, the abuse that was in the family, or the alcoholism that was in the family, or the whatever pattern was being worked on, somehow affects them and ripples through the whole family line. I mean, I've had, stories like that with people. I had a woman who worked with something with her mother, and as soon as we finished the session, And we went back into karma, we went back into ancestry, we did a lot of clearing of this particular issue. And she called me a couple days later and she said, I got home and there was a message from my mother on my answering machine saying to me, I know I've never told you this. I love you. Right? Right at that moment that we're doing that
awesome.
piece of work. Right? So that in a small way, in a macrocosmic way, is illustrating a principle that we are part of these collective fields, ever increasing, like I said, either decreasing or increasing to individuated to collective. And if you shift something, the whole field shifts. So archetypes are another field.
Right. So how do you access that in a person? How do you get them to open up to you?
Oh, well, what you're talking about is what we talk about in our work, in regressive work. And that's just one way that I romp around in human psyche. But we'll use that one as a model. We call them inductions. So there's a certain induction that you use, and we have a certain induction that we use that combines a core issue. Let's say somebody comes and they want to work on depression, right? So within that, as I'm working with them, just talking, I'll get a picture of what is the phrase within the depression, which then tunes into what is the affect, what is the emotional imprint, what is the physical imprint. When I have all three of those, I tie them together. It's like a Google search for the psyche. And we go right for that core, using those three things combined. That's called an induction. And, because you can romp around, I mean, this is a thing that happens with, I'm not dissing it, but plant spirit medicine or even breath work to a certain degree. Okay, plant spirit medicine to a certain degree has a guiding consciousness because we know it's a living entity, like, in ayahuasca or whatever. But there's a certain openness, like one blasts themselves into the astral planes. And as you know, some people come out of those experiences not so put together. It's the same with breath work, right? I call it more free-floating catharsis. Just because you had a catharsis doesn't mean you move the complex, because there's an integration. It's not even integration. That's a longer discussion. But anyway, what we find in regressive work is that the story, whatever story we go to, be it an ancestral story, or a past life story, that becomes the container for the process. And the good part about past life stories is that you will eventually die, right? Which means that however horrific that life is, the torture, the drudgery, the whatever it is, you will eventually die, which means we can close the circle in the psyche, and then we can continue the work in the afterlife of that past life self to bring all those wounds to completion. And all of that happens in a single session. So we meticulously have targeted something specific in the psyche. We're not interested in just romping around the astral plane purposelessly, right? We're going specifically for what, it's like laser surgery, right? And using that, we will open it up to its deepest, close it, bring it to completion, and then bring it back into the current life psyche, right? That's a different way of navigating those worlds, but doing it with kind of laser focus and a very tight container, right?
So what are triggers for you?
Me? Oh, I have tons of them. I mean, I've done a couple hundred in my own past lives, but a big one, and you might not believe this, was speaking up. I was shy. I would not speak up in a crowd. I was deeply mystical. I called myself a closet mystic until I was about 20. But I would only share those thoughts with like-minded others. Never would anybody ever guess what was going on in my consciousness that wasn't somebody that was a like-minded other. And that came from lots of lifetimes of persecution, right? And belonging to esoteric secret cults, right? Or societies. And when you belong to a lot of esoteric societies, you take vows of we don't talk about that, right? Because in past times it wasn't safe to. Well, my consciousness hadn't gotten the memo that this was a different life and this is a different time. So I had an accumulated karma around many lifetimes of that kind of persecution and just, we don't speak about this, that took several regressions. But after that, I would never be doing the work I do today if I hadn't done those regressions, because I was quite happy being a closet mystic, you know?
And when you do regressions, do you ever discover karmic pasts from other worlds, other realities?
Yeah. Well, in what way? You mean like evolution on other planets, or spheres of reality, or
memories of lives in other realms, other worlds?
I do. It can, again, you can trip around the astral plane, and trust me, anything and everything is possible in the other worlds. We know that. Anything you can imagine, and things you have never imagined they are existent realities. My point is always, if it doesn't have a therapeutic value or a healing value to the soul and to the force of the evolution and wounding that soul is coming to me for, I don't care about it. Meaning, if it comes up in regression, if it doesn't have a therapeutic value, I'm not going to go sniffing down that trail. There are some people who are explorers of consciousness who are fascinated by that, and that's great. It's not what I do. I'm a healer, right? I'm a healer, and I want to facilitate. I want to facilitate that process that I believe in, which is evolution, and facilitate the maximum of free will, right? I want to help clear. I want to open up the hamster cage and set that hamster free, right? My website, before it was Healed Past, was called Free Yourself, right? So it was kind of a maximum of mine. It's like a life purpose of mine. That's what I want to do. Free consciousness as much as possible.
Well, free yourself is a bit of a different syntax than heal yourself.
Well, I came to the realization, or not even realization, that they're one and the same, right? Like I said, we can't expand the hamster cage or even open up the door and get the hamster out until we work with the cage, right? So working with all of those layers of conditions are what helps dissolve it, expand it, give you more choices, which to me, desire and choice is the core of the soul, right? I mean, it all ties back to what is the definition of karma, right? But at the core of the soul, there is desire. But desire is limited by all of these conditions. Free will is limited by all of these conditions. To a certain degree, that is the process of enlightenment, the purification of the subtle bodies, so that the energy of spirit and soul can act clearly through those vehicles and not be trapped by it, by the cage, right? But use it. Right, so the ego can be a vehicle of the light of the soul of the spirit.
Would you say that you're at that stage personally?
No.
Are you in some shamanistic traditions, recapitulation is a very important practice through dreaming, through recapitulating all lifetimes. It's a freedom, whether it's a healing purpose or not. It's just a remembrance. It seems that's what I was asking you earlier about, are we just locked in memory? Is it just that we have to find our way back through memory, or are we actually exploring anything new, if you know what I mean?
Oh, I see. Well, the more one is, so let's just say that everything that humans have ever thought and believed and manifested, let's just leave it in the mental, emotional bodies. Everything that humans have ever thought or felt has a form in the unseen worlds. All right? And that band lies around the earth plane. It's what we call the astral realm. Right? And you are intensely influenced by that all of the time. Okay. But you're mostly intensely influenced by those themes within that realm that relate to your individuated karma. For example, you might be depressive, right? Somebody else might be addictive, right? Somebody else. There are our own individual themes
Right.
that then tie into those collective things that then live through us. So all of the archetypes and all that has a light through us, but there's a connecting thread. So again, I don't know if gets back to the specific question you just asked me, but again, the more we clear our thread of that, the freer maximum free will we can have, which is enlightenment, which is freedom of expression, which is becoming a co-creator. Those memories, if you want to use the word memory, they exist independent of us, yet they have their lives through us. Right? They exist. Right? And they are going to condition your consciousness.
And that's the healing that you're mentioning before that a family would feel.
Yeah.
That you're healing the field by healing yourself.
Yeah, but in shamanistic terms, we would say we are actually literally working with the spirit of that departed ancestor that's been haunting the family fields. Right? Because they are so unfinished with their... When you're unfinished with something, we can use another term that the Tibetans talk about. They call it karmic gravity, right? The weight of all of that mud and wounds and all that keeps you closer to the earth plane. You can't get up there. Do you know what I mean? You're just weighted down, right? This is what earthbound spirits are, but parts of our own soul are fragmented, lost, and this is one thing people don't often think about past life work as soul retrieval, but it is soul retrieval because we're not working with memory as much as we are literally working with fragmented parts of the psyche that are literally still stuck in those traumas, be it hanging in a village square, be it stuck in a dungeon, be it, in front of a crowd that's stoning them to death, and still in that terror. Because trauma, the effect of trauma on the psyche is fragmentation. This is the beauty of the language of shamanism, but that language exists in psychology too. We call it splitting and dissociation and fragmentation. In shamanism, they call it soul loss. We know we can observe this in a single lifetime, how a child part can fragment and then still stay in the closet terrified, and is still there even though you're 60 years old, until we can go back and retrieve that. Well, guess what? That's happened to you over thousands of lifetimes, right? And this is what I mean. You can't cognate those parts back. There's no mantras that you can do, right? You can't get that frightened child out of the closet. You've got to descend in through the terror and fear that child part of you feels, and go and get that child out of the closet and bring it back to your present day consciousness. That's a shamanic model. And that's what we do in regressive work, present and past life. I do a lot of present life regression too, with victims of trauma, like soldiers, like abuse victims. It's all the same. It's a beautiful model of the psyche, a wise model of the psyche that we apply in our work, present and past life.
So how did the idea of Wetiko influence your approach to that?
Oh, we were talking about that before with Wetiko.
The fact that
I wouldn't say it's intertwined. I just find that line of thinking interesting, as I was saying in my other hat. Wait, let me put on my astrologer hat. In my astrologer hat, working with evolutionary astrology, we work with an asteroid, but it's a principle within the human psyche of the Luciferic principle, of the energy of Lucifer, which I was commenting to you is very similar in our description and our way of looking at it as Wetiko, Paul Levy's Wetiko.
Actually, it's very. He was reciting a lot of different cultures have that. Understand that as being
Yeah,
an influence on humans.
right, right. Well, I mean, I do work with non-human entities that some would call demonic, right? If we use the Christian terminology. And in my experience, I have found in those cases of varying levels of possession um, that those beings are not um, eternally separated from their rightful place in the light. They are always welcome back, but they get so separated from the light. And again, the longer you stay away from, the longer you muddle around the astral plane, right? Lost in your own, those soul parts, let's say, but I'm talking non-human entities. They get, whatever, lost, and then they muddle around the astral plane and they accumulate more and more dust, and it gets darker and darker and darker. The Tibetans describe this, in the Bardos, right? The longer you stay in the Bardos and you don't realize that you are the Buddha, you are, right, that consciousness, you get drawn lower and lower until all the demons are chasing you, and, you're basically meeting the product of your own individuated unconscious mind in the afterlife. Well, so those beings can get more denser and denser and more in their hatred and their disgust and their revenge and their, what we would call these shadow qualities. And they become autonomous kind of beings, and they can act as demonic beings, right? Some of them are split off parts of people's consciousness, but some of them are, to a certain degree, cosmic energies gone astray, right? They don't have a human origin. Some of them come out of human thought forms.
And it seems,
but they have an independent consciousness, I guess, is what I wanted to say. They have a certain, like, if they're motivated by vengeance, they are out for vengeance, and they're doing whatever they can to enact vengeance on whoever they're attached to or whatever area they're attached to. It simply is the energy that they're polarized to. Right. They can be, in my experience, rectified back to the source, which to me points to that, that place where the source exists is beyond duality. Right. Duality is our experience, but in that place, it's beyond duality.
Why? I imagine you started first with esoteric astrology and got into evolutionary. What do you use both methods? Are both perspectives, or?
Well, I wouldn't say that I used a specific method of esoteric astrology. That would be more in the theosophical line, which was the early Alice Bailey stuff, and which I studied when I was young. But I didn't apply their astrological methods. For me, as an astrologer starting out, I was more interested in the psycho-spiritual, like Liz Green and, the more psychologically oriented Stephen Ario, the early, those writers. So that's where I came from, was the more psychologically, but depth psychology, psycho-spiritual schools. And then, of course, evolutionary astrology, when Jeff Green, brought that paradigm out, was just so inclusive of all of those, not only deeply psychological, but a deep understanding of the psychology of the soul, and what conditions, what we would call karma, it's subject to, and the simultaneous condition of evolution, and what does that affect upon the soul as it relates to the human psyche. And that's all together. So once I discovered evolutionary astrology, I was like, that's it. This is everything I love, all in one package. It's kind of the same with the regression work that I do. When Roger put together Deep Memory Process, he drew, being a great Sagittarian that he was, he's passed on now, he drew from so many different fields of thought, be it Tibetan Buddhism and shamanism and Brazilian Spiritism, and all of that, and synthesized it into a model of the human psyche, and then what does one need to do to heal that human psyche. So to me, I'm a Sagittarius also. I love those comprehensive cosmological where macrocosm reflects the microcosm, and you can make it practical and usable, right? To affect change.
You mentioned Liz Green. She was a big influence. Her book Saturn: A New Look at an Old Devil was a big influence when I was younger. I've got Saturn exactly conjunct my moon, and as a young person, I really felt that oppression and that
the depressive energy.
Yeah, totally. And reading her book just gave it a new angle. As opposed to the oppressor, it was the self-discipline and the structure of understanding, as opposed to the oppression of weight. Anyways, her book was very helpful for me also in sort of looking at pain in a new way.
Exactly. Yeah, well, Saturn, again, this is the thing. There's such a spectrum. There's a spectrum of meaning of every archetype, right? To me, and in my book, Understanding Karmic Complexes, I talk about that. I talk about specifically karmically, where we move from the wounded level of the archetype to the empowered level of the archetype, which then liberates some aspect of soul into one's life. It's a natural. I see it in every single session I've done with people, and that's tens of thousands of sessions in regressive or inner journey work, right? So anyway, that's another story. So, on another level, that Saturn moon that you're talking about is mastery, right? That's the Saturn Capricorn is the wizard, right? So to a certain degree, yes, it can be the wound in your early childhood, right, of repression, or you were emotionally or forced to be emotionally repressed, or you experienced some repression of your natural and emotional nature, or however that came about. Discipline, however it was, critical words, I don't know what signs they're in, but anyway, it could be a lot of different things you internalized. But those are conditions placed on your emotional body. Well, if we look at how does one evolve that from the wounded archetype to the empowered archetype, it's mastery. It's not control of the emotions as much as, it's the structure of it and the mastery of it to give it a framework and expression. Right? I mean, that's just an example of moving from the wounded but there's a whole spectrum of meaning in between there of what is the archetype of Saturn, what is the archetype of Moon.
You mentioned that we are co-creators. We are creators at our core, and I imagine every religion or every discipline that has a lineage has set an intent of what's possible for anybody who follows that intent. What intent do you follow? I know that in this, you immerse yourself in the story, and you're trying to deconstruct the story for people. For yourself, where do you see your soul going?
Well, I can look at my chart and know what I'm supposed to be doing, right? Because there's the conditions, right? Maybe your south node in evolutionary astrology, it's your south node in your polarity, your south node and your north node points to the other, and your polarity point to Pluto. I mean, there is a funny example of that, because when I started to learn evolutionary astrology, I looked at my chart, and the prescription for my evolution is pretty darn good, right? Like, I got a really good prescription this life, which was based, I have a Leo north node, so the universe was like saying, go out there, stop that. I have Saturn conjunct my south node. So you and we know Saturn on a deep emotional level, right? It's all, and I can tell you now, I didn't know it then, but hundreds of lifetimes I died in dungeons, right? Or confined or in slavery or whatever. That's Saturn conjunct the south node. So, kind of, ugh. And so here the universe comes and says, you know what, enough of that, like you've gotten too much of that imprisonment thing in your consciousness. Now we're going to give you a Leo North Node in the 5th house, which is the double signature, that says, go out there, be on stage, have fun, creative self-expression, like you've forgotten how to do that. And when you take it even further, the ruler of the North Node is the Sun, and it conjuncts the MC of my chart in Sagittarius, wow, which is maximum, like, wow, be out there. Yeah. The total antithesis of who I was when I came into this life. Mm-hmm. And I remember, 10, 12 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago, looking at my chart with that mental knowing, before I had done all of this regressive work and all my own, deep plumbing of those complexes, and saying, wow, what a prescription for life, but I don't have any feeling for it. Like, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Like, what does that mean? You know what I mean? Play? I don't get that. It's all about work, like self-expression. I mean, it's not that I wasn't self-expressive, but not in that Leo in the fifth house way, Right. And now, so again, back to my point about what we were saying about the hamster in the cage, there was no way I could have cognated myself to that point of evolution. I'm not saying I've arrived there, but to really be in the energy, I would say I am in the energy of my Leo North Node, right? Certainly a heck of a lot more than I was 15, 20 years ago, right? Is there more to evolve? Absolutely, I'm sure. I'm still trying to figure out, how to get more play in my life. I still do resort to that kind of Saturnian, kind of
default.
And I'm a Pluto Virgo. You're probably a Pluto Leo, maybe, or no?
I'm a Virgo. Pluto Virgo.
You're Pluto Virgo, yes. So add Saturn to your Pluto Virgo, right? Where it's all like, get to work. So
I also have North Node conjunct my midheaven.
Your MC?
Yeah.
That North Node's in what sign?
Cancer.
Oh, Cancer. Okay. Oh, so you really are coming from a Capricorn, because you have a Capricorn South Node too.
That's right.
Right. So those themes that kept floating in my depression, oppression, enslavement.
And my Saturn is conjunct Aquarius in the fourth house, so it's all kind of.
Okay, well, welcome to your karmic themes, right? Some of the things we were touching upon are definitely a lot of your themes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and it's no surprise that's what I explore in this project with everybody. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
So, well, I can certainly see the Leo in you. You exude warmth and brightness and openness.
But I didn't before. That's the funny thing is, I'm not saying I was always a Sag. I was always enthusiastic. I was always probably, maybe sometimes overly enthusiastic and, adventurous and that kind of stuff. But certainly, but when it comes to the things that mattered, my deep interior world, the things that were sacred to me, that's what I was talking about.
Right.
I held those so close to my breast, and now I just am that. Right. Like there's no guessing, there's no hiding, there's no anything. Well, and that's where the coming to the Leo North Node for me. Right. It's just a natural expression of who I am.
And that's a typical Saturn expression, isn't it? That's always a little bit later in life.
Well, sometimes that's a Cancerian thing where they say people with fourth house or Cancer kind of come into their own later in life, because Cancer is an archetype of home, right? And when you think about it as archetypally, the mother stays at home. Again, this isn't reality, it's archetypally. Mother stays home with the baby, and then once all the kids leave, right, she then discovers she has life. Or a midlife crisis, right? Either one, right? Or discover she has life through a midlife crisis, right? So Jung talked about where most people experience the impulse towards individuation. So she then needs to appropriate her animus, how to be out in the world. That's Capricorn. So the Cancerian archetype often carries a kind of like later in life. Yeah.
So do you exercise your energy body through dreaming or anything like that? Any practices of that sort?
Yeah. I mean, it's all the human psyche, I've been referencing regression a lot because that's one preferred, it's my specialty, when I teach it. So I really kind of live it. That's one, but I do a lot of, even in astrology. In fact, I'm working on a book and I'm launching a new school called Kairos Astrology, which is going to be, I'm working on a book about it, which is going to be teaching professional astrologers how to engage the imagination, journeying, active imagination, dreaming, and all of that to get in touch with the living archetypes for themselves and for their clients. So I've developed a lot of techniques over the years of working with it, and that's what I'm launching And the new school will be an experiential model of how to apply those methods in the context of using an astrological chart.
Wow.
So I do it all the time. I mean, I love it. You know, somebody said to me, if I had a religion, asked me once, what was your religion? If I had a religion, it would be how the divine expresses itself through the human psyche. And I'm endlessly fascinated, and I'm sure you are too, right? Why you do this project, right? It's the kind of, you know, we're like the blind men with the elephant, right? We each have our own little corner, and we're trying to put it together using all of these different views and lenses and methodologies and techniques and our own exploration of consciousness, right?
Yeah. Is everything that somebody does, is that related in your mind to a past karmic something to be resolved?
I'm not going to say, you know, I'm not. I think it would be foolish to say it would be dogmatic to say yes always.
Well, I mean that only because there's everything that every conflict that we find within ourselves obviously is a resolution waiting to happen, and every resolution waiting to happen is a resolution for consciousness. I mean, everything is something. From my point of view, everything should be resolved. That's my goal, is to resolve. I would like to see everything resolved.
Spoken like a true Pluto Virgo.
Yeah, right.
Like, it's the constant self-improvement, right?
Right.
So we want to bring things into some kind of resolution. You know, there's got to be a way.
That's right.
Right. So Pluto Virgo, you know, I'm that same generation, right? The Pluto Virgos are the ones that brought the whole mind, body, spirit, alternative health, and all of that. You know, we did it quieter than the Pluto Leos because we're Virgos. Like, you know, maybe we'll just start this, you know, thing called homeopathy or whatever. It'll catch on. You know, we won't really promote it, but you know, right? There's a lot. But that it's healing. Healing is the Virgo Pisces axis. Right? It's a drive. It's a part of that archetype. So yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
So the last question that I ask everybody is if you could make a public service message to humanity, and I'm going to take my picture off of this. Let me just get rid of my... Okay, so now it's only you. So if you could give a public service message to humanity, what would you say?
Dear humanity, life doesn't have to be so serious, but it should be taken seriously. If you could embrace the idea that we are all a part of one emanation, boy, how differently would we run our planet? How differently would we live our lives? So I would encourage you, humanity, to find yourself as one part of a living whole, and then see how that changes the way that you live your life.
Awesome.
That's that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
It's a pleasure to speak with you.